and I posted on my YouTube channel. And so you'll be able to review this. You can share this with your students, the whole 9 yards.
Okay.
Just so that you know. There's other people who couldn't make it today. Okay, so, and this will give them an opportunity to actually view this. So the first thing I need you to do is go to your application folder. And scroll down to the bottom of your application folder. You're looking for your utilities folder inside of that. Inside of your utilities folder is a disk utility application. That's what we're looking for. So I need you to launch that guy. And when it opens up, your screen will look slightly different than mine, just because typically at the top of this would be the internal hard drive that's actually running this computer. Mine has been partitioned into 2 different partitions, and they've been renamed. So yours more than likely will say Macintosh HD up here. And then you should see, that's your internal, you should also see a place for external, and it should say something like either media with Untitled 1 underneath it, or something else. But this is the hard drive, this is the little jump drive that we've got in there that we need to work with. Are you good on that? Okay. So you actually want to click the parent. You don't want to click the thing that goes, that is this, that actually says Untitled. We're going to click on the parent first. And the reason I bring this up in the...
I just get external and Untitled. I don't get
me too.
Okay, then I'm going to just click on the Untitled part. This may have changed slightly depending on the version of software that you guys, or the system software that you're running, but it should be relatively close. So I'll do mine the same way you guys are. I'm going to click on the Untitled one. The reason that I bring this part up is that if you, I don't know if you've had students that have been having trouble with their hard drives getting wonky, for lack of a better way of putting it, over a period of time. If you buy a brand new hard drive right out of the box, with a few exceptions, the OWC, which is the big Mac supply place here in Illinois, sells hard drives that are already formatted for Macintosh. However, the 99.9% of the hard drives out there in the world are formatted for Windows. The trick to it is that a Windows machine can read that. It cannot read a hard drive that's been formatted for Macintosh. The flip side of that is that Macintosh can read everything. It can read a Macintosh hard drive that's been set up for Macintosh. It can also read one that's been set up for Windows. However, as time has gone on, that ability to read Windows formatted hard drives has deteriorated. Lack of a better way of putting it. Apple software, unfortunately, Apple has put so much effort into their iPhones and that kind of stuff. They call it Apple rot. They've really let what happens in the system stuff go. And so all the students that I have who start having problems with their hard drives later on, every single time we go in there and copy their data off of it and reformat it as a Macintosh hard drive and then put their data back on it, their problems go away. So I want to go through the whole process of doing that here so you understand what that is.
Formatted for the Mac, or if they've been formatted for PC?
If you buy a hard drive, take it out of the box and plug it in, it's formatted for a PC.
I always have them. I can't remember the exact instructions, but I have on my Canvas formatting for Mac, formatting for PC,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of try to get them not to use, and formatting for both, which seems to not work very well.
All of that can be, again, I think especially for the intro classes, what we're trying to do is get things as simple as we possibly can, because they're overwhelmed by so much.
Yeah.
And so we've had to make compromises. Yes, you can do all the above. You can split hard drives into 2, 3, multiple partitions. You can have some partition for PC, some for Mac.
Really formatting for both. I don't use that. People don't use that very often, but I thought it wasn't about partitions. It was about, I don't know, being able to read and write for both systems.
Well, again, if you format it for a PC, a Macintosh can read and write it. But again, there are problems that have been coming arising. And so my suggestion is, unless there's a really compelling reason to do both, you should actually have them format for a Mac. I'm going to show you how to do both.
But if they have PCs at home,
yes,
then they need to format for PC.
And so I'm going to show you how to do all that right now. So to start with, again, click on your Untitled over here on the left-hand side, because this is where you pick what you want to do. And then we're going to come up and click on Erase. And when you click on Erase, this thing is going to actually open up. A little window will open up. And you will see that you can actually rename the hard drive. I'm going to go ahead and leave mine. Actually, I'm going to rename mine, because we might as well go through it. And I'm just going to call it External Thumb Drive. And then you'll see there is a drop-down menu here. In this drop-down menu, this is what they call the partition map. And all that really refers to is basically, if you think about your hard drive, the way I like to think about a hard drive is sort of like a record album. This is setting out how the grooves in your record album work. Does your record album spin clockwise or counterclockwise? It's all of that information. It doesn't really do anything. It just lays out the map. So in our case, what we always want to do for Macintosh is use this Mac OS extended, in parentheses, journaled. I discourage encryption right now. Again, this would be encrypting on a partition level. If you want to encrypt the data on your hard drive, there's easier ways to do that. So again, it's just trying to avoid problems. Again, the whole case sensitivity issue right here, all of this, you tend to want to avoid these. These only make things more complicated, and it's complicated on a basic hardware level that we don't want to get into. The next, so if we go through all of those, this Exfat, this is actually primarily designed for Linux operating systems. Again, something we would never get into here. But most people who run servers, big backup servers, that kind of stuff, will actually end up formatting in this Exfat. But it's for a Linux system. It's not really for what we want to do here at all. And then again, the one at the very bottom, this MS-DOS FAT. That's what you would pick if you want this hard drive to be compatible with a PC. So only two options we've really got here are the one at the top, the Mac OS Extended, which is Macintosh only, or the one at the bottom, this MS-DOS FAT, which is both. Yes?
It seems like it would be better to go MS-DOS FAT so it could be read on anything, but that's where the problem comes in, you're saying, down the road.
Again, in theory, you're right. In practice, there have been problems that have been creeping up, and it's increasing. That's all I can say to you. Is it
that side, the Mac side, or both?
I'm sorry, what?
Are the problems on the PC side, the Mac side, or both?
They're on the Mac side.
And I think that there's also been maybe some Lightroom rot.
Oh, I'm sure there has been.
Where they're kind of letting themselves go, and then
you know, again, it's sort of where they're devoting all of their resources, and Macintosh is clearly taking a hit with the resources being diverted to iPhone, and there's just no question. I mean, there's countless blogs, threads about all of this stuff. So at any rate, we're going to pick this Mac OS Extended Journal at the very top. Security options, you can click on that. What security options basically mean, it's just a time thing. If you've got a hard drive that you know has got sensitive data on it that you want to completely erase and you don't want anybody to be able to recover that, the real issue is that when we erase a hard drive, like what we're going to do right now, erasing that hard drive, it doesn't touch anything on the drive, it just erases the directory. And what a directory is it's like a phone book. It's a list of all the files that are on your computer and where they are. It's not the files themselves, it's just a list of where they're located. So when you erase a hard drive, all it does is it erases that directory. All of the information that's on your hard drive is still there and can be recovered. So what this security option does, if you crank this security from faster all the way up to most secure, what it will do is when you're formatting this hard drive, after it's formatted, it will go in and it will write zeros to every single block on the hard drive.
How much longer does that take?
It takes forever.
Forever. Do it in the evening
So no, if you've got a 4 terabyte hard drive and you click on that, you can come back in a week. It's got to write a piece of data to every possible block in that hard drive. So don't use it, is all I can say. If you've got that kind of information that you're really concerned about, take the hard drives are cheap. take it out, run it over with your car, set it on fire, do something to it, but don't do this. You'll hate your life. Okay, so I'm going to click out of here. I'm not going to change that at all. And then I'm going to simply click on erase. So it's going to go through this thing, and sometimes, and this again, this is a consequence of Apple rot, unfortunately, sometimes you'll get an error message up here saying it could not do the option that you ask it to do. Run it again. On the second go around, sometimes you'll get an error message. Run it again. Sooner or later, this thing will work. So hopefully you guys have it done like I've got on mine. Did that work for you guys?
Probably because it was empty anyway, so it's really not that hard.
Yeah, but I just want to go through the steps so that you see what's really going on here. So we can go ahead and click OK to the done part right here. So now we've actually got a hard drive. So if you want to, do you guys have media up here now?
No.
Do you have anything up here?
It says no. Just says external, then thumb drive.
Me too.
This one, really quick. Interesting, yeah. So yours does look slightly different than mine.
Yeah,
Okay.
mine looks like his.
I also got more options as far as reformatting it too, which is interesting.
Yeah, a whole string of options on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've updated this system software, obviously, but again, the majority of it we can still go through. So you guys need to click on what you're calling external hard drive, and then we're going to click on partition. Do you have anything that looks like this?
Oh, partition.
Hold on. Wait, how do you?
Over the top.
Yeah.
Menu bar, partition.
Okay.
Okay, so with this guy coming up here, partitioned like this, the one thing you want to check on this is that it's this thing right here called schema, and it should say GUID partition map. Do you guys see that? That is what you need to see to have this work for a Macintosh, period. So that's a good sign. If you want to add an additional partition, so if you wanted to break your hard drive into two, now again, I don't really suggest doing this. I'm showing you guys this, but this is the kind of thing that I would avoid with a Photo Practice 1 or Photo Practice 2 student, because this is just overload. But just so that you guys know, if you wanted to add an additional partition, you simply click on this little plus down here, and you will see that you get your first partition that was called external thumb drive should be there. And we've got another partition here that's now called Untitled, and you'll see it has changed the name right here. You could change that name to anything you want, so I'm going to change this name to just storage. You can control the relative size of the partitions to a point. You do that by clicking and dragging on this guy. So you can see I need for my external hard drive, this is where all the information about how the hard drive works is being stored in this. So I cannot make this partition any bigger, but I can make it smaller. So as I'm making it smaller, my storage partition is getting smaller, my external hard drive, thumb drive part is getting bigger. This is where you can also, again, if you click into your drop-down menu, if you wanted to make this storage partition functioning for a PC, you could click on MS-DOS FAT. This partition will be Macintosh, the Macintosh OS X extended. This one would then be rendered in an MS-DOS FAT.
But that wouldn't really help them in terms of Lightroom, right?
No, it doesn't help them in Lightroom at all. And to be honest with you, all of this is more confusing. Again, I strongly suggest you don't do any of this with them, but you guys seem to know enough about what you're doing that I just wanted to make sure, as long as we were here, you might as well look at it. Exactly. And to be honest with you, that's what they've actually done on these machines right here. The internal hard drives are here are split into two different partitions, and that's how it works.
Oh, that's how they have Mac.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, and I'm going to hit cancel out of this because I don't want to go into partitioning here at all. But we are going to run one last thing on here, and it's this thing that says First Aid. So again, you would probably click on your external thumb drive part right here, click on First Aid, and it's going to say, do you want to run First Aid on your external hard drive? And you want to go ahead and run this. Again, it's just to check what it's really doing, and you'll see in here, if you click and open up your details here, it'll show you that it's looking for to make sure that the file setup on there is actually set up correctly, and simply hit done. And we have now formatted our external hard drive. We've gone through all the parts that we actually need to do about that. So are we good? Do you guys have any questions about this part?
No.
Okay. Occasionally when you do this, you will get a pop-up window. I'm going to show you what it looks like. I'm going to open up my, actually what I'm going to do right now is give you guys this. This is another hard drive. This has got the information on it that you actually need. So there's two folder.
Are you
No,
going to give us a printout by any chance?
I'm going to give you the electronic version of it right now.
Oh, but do you have anything on? I just need paper.
Oh, no, I don't have a printout of this. Sorry.
Yeah. Just in case.
So when that second hard drive opened up, do you see there should be a folder that says compact drive imitation?
Oh, wait.
Could you, I'm going to give you, again, I can't get onto the server. I would put it there and you guys could both copy it over, but we can't get on the server. Copy that folder to your desktop, please. And then there's also a PDF on there that's called the Photo Practice Workflow. Copy that also to your desktop, please. And then if you could eject that little thumb drive and trade so that I can get it as well. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and open mine up. We're going to go through a couple things here really quick, but what I wanted to show you that could happen, it's the one closest to the classroom. Yeah, that's the one. So the last thing that I wanted to show you once we go through it, because it's something that happens automatically. It did not happen for us, or in my case for me, probably because the thumb drive is too small. But if you do this with a hard drive, one of the first things that, as soon as you finish running your first aid, what usually will happen, and this could happen before you actually run the first aid, the minute you've actually erased the hard drive and it has repartitioned, you'll get this dialog box right here that opens up, and the dialog box is going to ask you if you want to use this thing for Time Machine. So in our case, you would say cancel on this. This is not what, if we can have a whole conversation about using Time Machine as a backup, but you would never want to use a Time Machine as a hard drive that held your Lightroom catalog. It's something that's used for backup protection only. Even though you could put a Lightroom catalog on there, it'll only cause you a world of hurt. You don't really want to do that. So I wanted to point that out. So did you see there's a folder in there that's called Compact Disk Imitate? Copy that to your desktop, and then also the PDF.
Yeah.
Okay, great. If you could open up the PDF, I want to give you guys a quick little tour of where we're at. Yeah, don't worry. If it said it said, oh, you ejected this and it wants to spank you, and yeah, don't worry about it.
Okay, it was the one. Okay.
Okay.
You want us to open up the workflow?
Yes. So if you look at the PDF, we're going to go through this PDF. Again, what I'm going to try to do today is do this, as much of this hands-on as I can possibly do, to really work you guys through it. And this is, again, in my experience, I think you guys probably know the same thing, that if you can actually have students physically doing something, they're more engaged and they remember it better, as opposed to just showing them on screen and having them on their phones going to sleep. So in the very beginning, and this is something that we all owe Chris a huge amount of gratitude and thanks for, this is Chris's workflow in the beginning. And so you'll see the first 2 pages of this. This is importing your images with Lightroom, and this is the quick start version. So again, we're not going to go through this because we're going to go through the long version. But once you have your students, however level that you want to get them to, how much information you want to go through, how painful you want to make it, this is really the thing that they need to keep. And my suggestion is that they copy this PDF to their hard drive so that they have it right there with their Lightroom catalog. So if there's ever any doubt about what's going on, they have a reference that's right there that they can open up and go to. in this, the way this PDF works is the first page of the PDF is, again, it's all done in a single page. And so you can, again, encourage them to take advantage of this and say, you know, if you're having trouble remembering how to import, this is all just in one page. I know this classroom is awful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's awful.
I have 807B, I think it is. There's a classroom right next to mine, no walls.
I've been down there too. Yeah, down there. Yeah, it's awful. It's awful.
I know what idiot figured out that was a good design.
I'm in 806 and it's kind of cool.
That's okay. I have that for yesterday. That's actually
okay. I typically work in 917 and I love that room. But at any rate, we digress. Okay, so at any rate, the first page is a from beginning to end one sheet that will show them how to properly import stuff. If you look at page number 2, it's a single sheet that again is how to export stuff.
Yes, this is fantastic.
So now I don't know this, and you guys should realize that this, because this is going to come up, and I'm pointing out different sort of areas where you might want to veer off of how it's stated or written in here. The way that we wrote this, we got together, there was 3 of us that were together, it was Jay, Chris, and myself to rewrite this thing. This was the consensus that the 3 of us came to. That does not mean that you guys can't. If you hate the naming convention of this, change it. If you hate the way, but I would strongly encourage at least the fundamental underpinnings of this to kind of follow that, because that way, when a student goes from photo practice 1 to photo practice 2, they're not going to walk into, oh my God, I've never seen this before. This isn't how it worked. This is not how I had it set up, whatever. So, but like I say, as we go through this, please, if you guys have alternate suggestions, I am more than willing to amend this and send that information out, and we will go from there. Okay, so one of the things, and the reason I bring this up right now is that I don't know how you guys collect your material to grade, but for me, and this is the way I work, and this is the way Chris works as well. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I want to point this out right here in this part. Typically for us, we do not want to look at raw files.
Absolutely.
What I want to look at is the catalog, and they've now made provisions using smart previews that you can actually, if there's been development done, if there's been other things that have been done, you can see all of that information without, then we're all on the same page. The reason I bring this up is it's this thing right here in the export of catalog, because I know you guys have this happen. We all have this happen. Is they export their entire catalog and then drop that on the server, and all of a sudden we're trying to, you know, either look at something or, God forbid, copy it off the server onto a hard drive of ours, and because it's 50 gigabytes.
I want to have them. Okay, so I've always used smart previews.
Right.
And for actual grading, I have them, you know, export it, smart previews only. Zip it, which doesn't do a whole lot because they're image files, and then upload it to Canvas.
We're going to go through both of those workflows exist in here now, because there are people who do different things.
Yeah.
There's people who prefer not to do it in Canvas. They want to do it only off the server. I'm like you. I prefer to do it in Canvas. I prefer them because Canvas is. It's unfortunate that you have to zip it because there's multiple files. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. The reason I wanted to point that out is that I don't do very many highlights. I don't do very many exclamation points or capitals. But that's what this is critical part is right here. It's so that they realize that you do not want their raw files.
Can I just
Yes,
okay.
sure.
So what I'm thinking about doing, because that happens frequently.
Yes.
So when they just click on, they only selected one image, even though they highlighted 20.
Right.
And then you get it, and there's like literally one.
Right.
Or they take it out of the folder.
Right.
Okay, so those are the 3 things
Right.
that happen. But I think what I'm going to have them do as an extra step is to just do, you know, get info on their folder, and if it's 200, 300 meg,
Right.
they included the negative file.
We'll show you because we've built in a couple of hopefully fail safes for that. Yes.
I wanted to add one more highlight. That's number 7. Pick your drive from the left column, because a lot of times they change the destination is the wrong spot. They miss that, then boom, where'd my files go?
Right. So, and
That's
we're
the
gonna,
second mistake there.
yeah, it's the 2. You're absolutely right. We're going to talk all about that when we get to exporting catalogs. Okay, so I'm going to blow past this because we are, again, we're going to deal with exactly what's in those sheets, but in greater detail. The whole first part here, then, you look through is exactly what we've just gone through to actually format a hard drive to get ready for this part to go. So as we go down here, if you guys want to come down with me, you need to get to page 5. This is where we're going to actually take off and start working right now. Now, I'm going to go back to, because again, what I record, the video I record is a screen capture of what we're seeing here. So I want to actually go through those parts. So I'm following a different version of this. You guys can continue to follow here with the PDF, but hopefully you'll do actually the real physical, set this up and do that part. So that's what I would prefer that you actually have, that you do. I think it'll be more instructive. All right, so we're going to go back to the Finder. We're going to find that external thumb drive that we actually just created. And we are going to build a set of folders, a folder hierarchy in here. So I'm going to simply click in the beginning to create a new empty folder. You can either come up to the File menu and come down to New Folder, or you can simply hold the Shift Command and hit the letter N, and it'll give you an untitled folder. And we are going to title this folder. We're going to type in Lightroom Library. Then we're actually going to click inside that folder. And I don't know if you guys are you guys using the sort of the hierarchy, same division like that I've got going here, just so that your screen looks the same as mine? So you're not using icons or that kind of stuff. Anyway, if you want to follow and to make it be the same, I'm using the column view that's over here, and you'll sort of see ascending, descending columns. Yes?
Okay, so camera files. Students have a really hard time, some students, like getting all of their files into camera files.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like part of it is the name. So now I call it imports camera files. Or so I have the word import in it. And
Okay.
I feel like that helps clarify it for students.
I get that part, and it might. What I would also suggest, though, because what we are doing here is we're actually using subfolders inside of there to hold the assignments.
Well, I do that too.
So
build all the subfolders before they import.
that's what other people do. I know that's what Chris does.
I think that's much better because I think that Lightroom, there's too much on the right-hand side when you're importing.
Right.
And the more there is, the easier it is to miss something.
Right.
Miss something important
Right.
because most of it is not important.
Right.
So I still feel like imports helps my students understand what it's for. But I think I had them pre-build the folders last semester too, and that helped too.
Okay, so what I would possibly suggest then to sort of try to take into account what you're saying, because I would agree with that. Maybe we can call this camera file imports, exactly. So that the beginning of the name is the same, so that when they get to another class, it's not like okay. But I think that's actually a good suggestion, so that's what I'll put in here as well. Okay, so inside of this library, we're going to do 3 folders, 3 new folders. So again, Shift Command N to create the first one, and the first one we are going to name Camera Files. And again, if you want to, you could add import after that. I'm going to leave mine as camera files just so that it matches the PDF. You want to click back into that same Lightroom library, because if you don't and you build the next folder, it's going to put it inside the camera files folder, which you can easily move, but just so to avoid that extra step. Shift Command N to create another untitled folder, and we're going to call this Catalogs. And then again, click in here one more time, one last new folder. And inside this folder, we're going to actually call it Exports. And this is our beginning setup part right here. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually launch Lightroom, and we are going to create a brand new catalog that will sit inside of this. So to do that, you can come down. I'm not sure if they have Lightroom in the dock. If they don't have it in the dock, then you need to go to your application folder, and we are looking for Adobe Lightroom, and they call it They change the name of this, it seems like, every time. So this is kind of a critical one right here. So you guys probably already know this, but in the last, not the last iteration of Lightroom, but the one before that, they split Lightroom into two completely different applications. One functions as a desktop application, the other functions online only in the cloud. And the only distinction that they've made between the two is Adobe Lightroom Classic CC or Adobe Lightroom CC. Adobe Lightroom CC is what they're pushing. That's the stuff that's actually done in the cloud. We are working with Adobe Classic CC, and again, this Classic is pretty critical because if people have downloaded both of these applications and they go to the wrong one, it will actually take them into an online cloud experience, which is going to be a world of hurt because their files won't be there, their whatever won't be, all of that stuff won't be there.
Yeah, we had this problem last semester. Now, the thing is, a lot of folks have Lightroom at home. What are the problems? We're still going to have people mismatched between what's at home and what's here.
That's true. And we will talk about that at the very end of this whole conversation because they have got machines here. And they've got, again, what's ultimately happened is that people are upgrading. Don't ask me why, but they are. I mean, they get a notification from Adobe saying, "Hey, the latest is out," and they go, "Update, yes," before anybody's troubleshot it, before anybody makes sure it works, before any of that. I don't know why the rush to update exists the way it does, but it does. At any rate, you're absolutely right. If they've updated to version 8 of this, and they come in here and they try to work on version 7 of Lightroom, which is what is on all these machines, they can't open their catalogs.
Why don't we have version 8?
There's a licensing issue now with Adobe. So Adobe, in their infinite grab for more money, is now insisting that, so the way the license works right now is that every computer at Columbia College has a copy of it on, and the license is tied to the machine. So no matter who works on this machine, they can use Adobe Lightroom. Adobe doesn't want it like that. They want every single person who works on this machine to have a license. So instead of the machine being licensed, you have to have the license.
So in other words, I don't give a goddamn license.
Well, think of it, exactly, think of it, is let's say we have 2,000, let's say,
but this is an institution.
yeah, but say they have 2,000 computers here at Columbia. We buy 2,000 licenses. There's 7,000 students here. If Adobe makes all 7,000 of them buy that, that's 5,000 more licenses for them.
I heard, though, from Courtney that another issue of why the school didn't upgrade to 8 is because we're running an older operating system and some of the computers won't be able to upgrade to an operating
There's
system.
no computer that I know of that would apply to.
Really, that would even be able to run.
No, that has to be something that's so old.
8 is a separate issue from CC versus Classic CC.
True.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We have multiple issues here.
Yeah, we do. So if that wasn't enough. Okay, so at any rate, you need to find the Adobe Classic CC.
I have it in here twice.
You have 2 versions of it?
I only have it once.
Yeah,
I
I
forget
do
the
have
option.
it.
Yes.
Well, one's in a folder and one's just the application. I don't know.
Oh, it could be somebody's pulled it out separate. But at any rate, before you launch this, you want to hold down the Option key and then click on Adobe, click on the application to actually load it. And the reason that we're holding down the Option key here is this gives us the opportunity, it brings up this dialog box and it allows us to create a new catalog. And that's what we're going to do now. So have you guys got this dialog box open? Did that work for you? If it didn't work for you, quit Lightroom. Again, hold down the Option key first and then relaunch.
Okay.
Got it? Okay. So this is another thing that actually came up in this part of the discussion, and this is sort of what we decided to, again, this was the compromise, the naming convention that you're going to use for the catalog. So we are sticking with what has been done here in the past. The naming of stuff later on the line gets changed, but the catalog part is the same. So if you click on this button that says create a new catalog, it'll open up a dialog box. And in the dialog box, the new catalog that we are going to create is going to be the initials of your name. So, and I do this in all caps. So for me, it's going to be JVE, John Verser Engelhard. Then there's an underscore in this. And let me make sure I get this naming convention correct. Yes, underscore catalog. So one of the things that comes up in this, and it's just something, again, I want to mention to you guys, is that there are people who have workflows that actually use different catalogs. They do multiple catalogs for different reasons. The upside to that possibly could be it allows you to keep types of work separate. So for instance, in a professional sort of working environment, if I was working for different clients and I wanted to keep all of my Neiman Marcus separate from all of my Lord & Taylor, this would allow me to do that. I could have a catalog for Neiman Marcus and one for Lord & Taylor. The problem and the reason that we don't do that in this more student environment is that in this, well, the problem in having separate catalogs is that if you go to look for a file, you don't just go to one place and look for it. You have to go to multiple places because you have multiple catalogs. You cannot search catalogs that, you can only have one catalog open at one time, and you can only search that one catalog that's open. So in our student situation, it's perfect for us to have a single catalog to work that way because they might want to find files that they've shot over all 4 years here at Columbia College. So we encourage them to keep this in a single catalog. But I'm just pointing that out, that there are work scenarios where people will prefer to have separate catalogs for very specific reasons. But in our case, this is not going to be one of those reasons. So in where we put this catalog, we need to navigate to this external thumb drive, into the Lightroom library, into the catalog folder, and this is where it gets created. So again, where I've gone is in the external thumb drive that I selected, that I had formatted, into Lightroom Library, into the catalog folder, and then we click on the Create button. And it'll do its thing. It will go through this part. It's going to update a catalog plugin for data. Basically, just another way for Adobe to sell you more shit.
Wait, I'm sorry, I missed that. New update.
Basically, it's updating. It's what it's doing for me. Now, again, it depends on the version of Lightroom that you're using. But you see this thing right here called Adobe Stock? It just put that plugin in for you. Hey.
So they were able to correct the server, so you should be able to connect.
Okay.
Hope it's not too late in the game.
We're fine. Okay, great, thanks.
Oh, good, great, thanks.
I'm sorry, I missed what just happened. Was it a new update available for Lightroom?
No, it
Okay,
wasn't.
so
What it was is it was putting a plug-in. Lightroom it has been extensible for a while. People can actually add features as plugins, and you can actually load them into Lightroom to create additional services. See this thing right here that says Adobe Stock? That was the service that just got created for me in my experience. So you don't want to click on Adobe Stock. Basically what it does is it takes you to, Adobe is now in the stock business. So if you click on Adobe Stock, it takes you to their stock library where you can buy more shit from them.
Right.
I didn't ask for that. Adobe just gave it to me. But all the splash screens, I don't know if you guys are working in recent versions of Photoshop, but the splash screen of Photoshop is nothing but a big storefront for Adobe Stock.
Multiple income streams.
Yeah, good for them. Okay, so we need to make sure that this whole thing worked out. So jump back out to your Finder again really quickly. Go to that external thumb drive. Go to the Lightroom library. Click on the catalog folder right here. Inside it, you should see a folder that's got the catalog name. Inside of that, you should see this. And now, this has been expanded. These are now, you end up with more files in here than typically in the old days you would end up with 2 files in here. You now end up with an assortment of files in here, and the reason I mention that is that this is where one of the places for us to hopefully avoid problems is what we are going to do is we are going to actually use, this is the Lightroom catalog right here. This file that has, it's just the, it's actually got the icon that's got the little LR in it. It's named with this, but it's also got the .lrcat. Now, there's other files in here that have got that same extension, except they have more. So this one is that LCAT with an extension of WAL. This is a .lock, whatever. This is the one that matters to us. So you need to select that once. Don't double click it. If you double click on it, it launches it. That's not what I want to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make an alias of this guy. And we'll talk about what that actually does and it means in just a second. But to make an alias of this guy, you want to highlight it so that it is active. You don't want to double click because, again, that takes you back into Lightroom. Simply highlight it, come up to the File menu, and you want to come down to Make Alias. And when you do that, it's going to generate another icon that also has that little Lightroom icon in it, but you'll notice at the bottom there's a little arrow that points sort of into the icon, but also you get this tag on the end of it that says alias. You want to keep that part of it. What we're going to do is we are going to drag this alias out of this folder right here, and we are going to put it onto the root of our external hard drive. So I got to do this in steps because I can't, I might be able to get all the way back. Yeah, I can get all the way back. So I'm going to grab the alias and I'm going to not rename it. I'm going to drag the alias on top of my external thumb drive and let go. And so what you'll have now is, and this again is something that we spent a great deal of time debating in our rewrite workshop. The reason that we are doing this is that one of the problems that students are having, huge problems that they are having, is they are starting the Lightroom application, not their catalog.
Yes.
And when they do that, Lightroom starts to look for the last catalog that was open for that copy of Lightroom. So if you're always working on your own laptop, that's not a problem. But if you are bringing your external hard drive in here to Columbia and you plug it into one of these machines and you launch the Lightroom application, it's going to look for whoever's catalog was there the last time that machine got used. If instead you insist that your students always launch Lightroom using this alias, that problem is gone.
That's interesting.
So we are going to quit Lightroom right now to make sure that this works. So I'm going to go back into Lightroom. We are going to quit Lightroom. We are going to then go back to our external thumb drive and simply double click on this alias. And all of those problems should go away. It will launch Lightroom. It will load this catalog that we just built, and you won't have any problem with it. And again, we pulled it specifically out of the catalog folder because the way the old workflow read was you had to go in, find that guy, double click on it, do all that, because this puts it on the root. It sits there forevermore.
They still have like a point of telling them not to just automatically go to the bar. They got to go to their drive to them.
Exactly, to always launch it from their drive.
Couldn't
Yes.
they drag it down to the dock and then when they put in their drive, when it just show up?
That's only on their computer.
It's only on their computer. If
come
they bring their drive here,
But I thought some stuff, when you have it on your drive, if you have it outside, it still shows
Don't
up
think
outside.
so.
Only on that computer you're dragging the alias to. If they come here and then plug into this computer,
it's not going to show up in the dock on this computer here.
because this is a different computer.
The dock is specific to the computer. And besides, these things right here, these will reset every night. They reset every night. So at any rate, it's just the easiest way that we found to do it. It's the
There's less steps.
less steps. And you can rename the alias. So if you wanted to, you could come into the Finder. It will still function. You could call this always start here, or, you know, you can give it another name that says, you know, big bold letters, don't be stupid, click this first. Or, well, I mean, you can, the alias is the alias. It's going to point to the right thing. Make sense? Okay. So that gets us through that part. So now we're going to go through, unfortunately, the long drudgery of setting up preferences. Now, this again is something that you should go through with them on their own machines, on their own laptops. This can save them a world of hurt, but at any rate, I want to go through these things and talk about the decisions that we made, the implications that we made from all of that. So here inside of Lightroom, if you come up to the Lightroom drop-down menu and you come down to simply Preferences, we're going to start here. There's a series of tabs that run across the top. We're going to start with the one that says General. Inside the one that says General, the things that we are suggesting that people do in this. This is, right now, it looks to me like these have been set close to defaults, only because I'm not seeing any able to reset right here. So the splash screen at startup, it's just the picture of the girl with the glasses on. There's a new picture for the new one here. It's just a question of whether you want that or not. I would leave that on. I personally do not want to automatically check for updates. This is a problem that a lot of students are getting into because it's all of a sudden a thing pops up and says, oh, there's a new version, and they are just clicking on, yep, update, and that's where this mismatch of versions has caused us a world of hurt. So I'm going to suggest that you guys do not check automatic select for updates. In terms of the import options, the show import when a memory card is detected, there's debate about this because depending on where you are and the workflow that you use, some people prefer to have other programs activate when they put in a compact flash card. Primarily, and again, this is far more advanced than where we were talking right now, but I want, again, you guys to understand the decisions that we made and understand what is also happening here. For me, I'm primarily a Capture One user. I'm not primarily a Lightroom user. So when I insert a compact flash card, I prefer to have Capture One open as opposed to Lightroom. This is where these things get controlled. In our experience, it's better because students primarily are going to be working in Lightroom, that this is where you do actually have it checked. So that when they insert a compact flash card, if Lightroom is not open, it will actually launch Lightroom. But more importantly, if it is open like we've got set up right here, when they put that thing in, the import dialog box will open. The window for importing will open automatically in Lightroom. It's a step that they don't have to do. Does that sort of make sense? You can run into a problem with this, and you should just know about this. I'm going to jump out really quickly to the Finder. I want you guys to jump out here with me. I don't know if this still exists in the version of software that you guys have, but we'll find out right now. If you click on your application folder, there's another set of cataloging software that competes with this, and it's Apple software. So iPhotos or Photos Now, those are both Apple programs, competes with this. When you do a fresh install of one of those, of a new system from Apple, it is enabled that when you put in your compact flash card or you connect your camera, that Photos, or if you've got an old version of it, iPhoto launches automatically. You need to turn that behavior off. To do that, if you scroll, you would think that you could set that up in either Photos or iPhoto. You don't. You set it up in a program called Image Capture. It's right here. Do you guys have an Image Capture? Again, I don't know if it's still a version in the software that you guys double click on that to launch it. Now, we're not going to be able to get to this, but if you're experiencing this behavior, which means you put in a compact flash card and Photos launches, you want to put in your compact flash card, you want to launch this image capture, you will see the device right here. It will be sitting right under here. If you click on that device, you will get a pop-up menu that sits down here, or a pop-up item that sits down here, allowing you to turn that behavior off, saying that when you put in this compact flash card or connect your camera, that you do not want Photos to automatically launch. This is where it's dealt with. So if that then is set up, you can quit this program right now. We can go back into Lightroom and continue to configure this. So that's what this guy is all about. We discourage this select current or previous imports because, again, the way we are going to set this up is that every assignment's going to have its own import catalog. So this is, again, you don't want this on autopilot, not catalog, I'm sorry, old folder. Sorry.
These detail selections are in that PDF.
All of them are right here. Ignore camera generated folder names. We do want that part done. Most cameras now are not generating their own folders, but depending on how your students have it set up, what will happen is that they've built a folder in their camera to do their capturing to. That folder will actually get imported and it will create confusion because, again, it won't be following the naming convention or the folder structure that we've got going on here. We debated about this treat JPEGs next to the raw file as separate photos. We decided to leave this off. Again, what we're looking for students to do is, and this will bring this up, it'll show it as a problem. It is possible to set your cameras up to shoot both a raw file and a JPEG now. If they do that, we don't want this to show up. What we only want to actually have show up in Lightroom is their raw photos. We don't want JPEGs next to it because, unfortunately, they can do a bunch of work on their if they don't realize that those two things are separate, they can do the work on their files on the wrong one. Instead of working on their raw file, they can work on the JPEG file. So we are leaving this unchecked. Replace embedded previews with the standard previews during idle time. It's just a time management thing. So when you shoot a raw file, in most cameras now, they generate a small JPEG to be the preview. That preview is not large enough for us to work on or to be really valuable to us in Lightroom. So we want to use the standard previews in Lightroom. So that's why we've got this part checked right here. I don't actually change any of this sound things here. It wouldn't really have a big impact on it a whole lot anyway. The next thing that we're going to go to is the presets right here. If you click on presets right here, there are a couple of things that are really critical for us here. It's interesting. They've changed now some of what's actually on this guy right here. But nonetheless, the important one is this right here. You want to check on this box right here, stores presets with the catalog. The reason that we are doing this is that when you get into doing things like building a preset for copyright, for instance, we can build, and we will build one, a preset for copyright, to add copyright when you're doing an import. You want that available to the catalog forever. If in the old days what ended up happening is that presets were saved in the system, they weren't saved in the catalog. That has now changed with this. This gives us the ability to actually store. The presets are stored with the catalog. So as you move your hard drive from one machine to another, the presets go with it because they didn't get stored in the system, they got stored in the catalog. So that's what's basically going on here. So we're going to leave that part checked. Then we are going to go to external editing. This is a biggie. And this is another one that we've had a huge amount of conversation about. So I thought and argued for this a lot. There are people here who are preferring to do different color spaces and different bit depths for their files. So we're going to just start at the top. For the file format, you have two options for this. So the file format, again, and this is for editing primarily, specifically in Photoshop. If you click on this drop-down menu, you have two options. You've got either a TIFF or a PSD. We suggested that people actually use the TIFF extension on this because you don't want Photoshop to be the only thing that can actually open this file if somebody develops it. So for instance, don't quote me on this, but I don't think Preview can open a PSD file, but it can open a TIFF file. So it's just a question of compatibility. There is no downside to using one of these over the other, so we are going to leave it as TIFF. In terms of the color space, this is a big debate here, but the color space that we've elected for, and it's going to happen, it happens throughout the entire digital department, this all the way up into advanced retouching, is to stay with Adobe RGB 1998. And the reason that we felt that this was imperative is that even though conceivably raw files can take advantage of the larger ProPhoto RGB space, ProPhoto is so large you have to use 16-bit to use it. The space is simply too big to be adequately described with 8 bits. So if you were to pick ProPhoto, you would have to pick 16-bit. That doubles your file size. We are already having issues with files being taking up too much space, processing time being too long. You double the file size, the processing time doubles as well. Yes.
Looking at personal use.
Yes.
Like if I wanted to put a book together, Sonia, then ProPhoto and 16-bit would be better.
So here's the deal.
Yes.
Here's the deal. So when we talk about color space, what we were talking about is a three-dimensional space. How big is it? And ProPhoto has a couple things going for it, a couple things going against it. All these spaces are theoretical spaces. They're mathematical spaces. ProPhoto is so big, it actually extends beyond the range of human vision.
So it's information you don't see.
You can't see. However, mathematically, you can push your image data out there. So you can go into Photoshop, put a curve on there, and shove that data out into an area that can't be seen by human eyes.
So in a practical sense, it's not going to show up in a print.
The other thing, and this has been the promise forever, is that there is to date no monitor that's even remotely close to being able to show you ProPhoto. The best you can pretty much get right now is Adobe RGB, 100%.
Well, what about print-wise?
And same thing with PrintWise. It's even worse. PrintWise doesn't even get close to Adobe RGB. It's much, much closer to sRGB, which is a much smaller space. However, that's the reason that we're actually dealing with it here. So I can't talk you out of that. What I can say to you is, if you are this is the holy grail part that's been put out there by Adobe forever, is that one day there may be a monitor that can show you ProPhoto. I can tell you right now, the three people sitting in this little room right here are not going to live long enough to see that. Mm-hmm. Or if you do, chances are you can't afford it.
I think they're embarrassed that 1998 is in the name, and that's
possibly
years ago.
Yeah, possibly.
You know?
So at any rate, but anyway, yes, you certainly can use it. But again, the space is so large, you have to have 16-bit. No, there isn't. So you can't see it, you can't print it, you can't do anything with it.
What about 16-bit versus 8-bit?
So again, you could have a 16-bit, and the advantage to a larger bit depth is that you've got a magnitude order of more tone and color to describe the same space.
But can you see it?
The thing is that what you see is, or what would ultimately end up happening, where you would pick this up, is if you were doing a really radical tonal correction that forced you to pull your tones or your colors that were very close to one another, so far apart that you actually could see the gap in between. So banding is basically what we're talking about.
So if you have a really bad file and you're trying to fix it, it might help.
What my suggestion was, and the reason that I don't get too caught up in this part, is that I do all of my heavy lifting on a raw file. The raw file has nothing to do with this. This is now editing out. This is now taking your raw data and cooking it, baking it into a TIFF or into a Photoshop file. All that really heavy tonal work that you should be doing either in Camera Raw or in Lightroom, not once you get it into Photoshop with a curve.
Yeah.
So, and if you really need to go back and do some really sort of serious other heavy lifting, you're better off going back in and working on your raw data than you are trying to do this in Photoshop. So the consequence of this becomes, do you want files that are twice the size? And my argument is that you don't need it. However, I want you guys to understand, again, the process to make that choice for yourself. So, but according to our workflow here, we are going to keep this as Adobe RGB in 8-bit. Resolution here is meaningless. It doesn't have anything to do with the file at all. It's strictly the size it'll be. It's basically the size the pixels will be. It doesn't add any pixels. It doesn't subtract any pixels. It doesn't change the resolution of your file. It's just mapping how big those pixels are. It's a meaningless thing. You don't need to get into it at all. If for some reason you wanted an alternative, you could also set up your additional external editor as TIFF in ProPhoto in 16-bit so that you've always got the option to actually have that part with it. Here, the stack with original, we are actually enabling this. We do want to keep this part on. Here, we are not doing a custom naming, an external naming file part right here, because to be perfectly honest with you, and this is yet to be worked out, in Photo Practice 1 and Photo Practice 2, and guys, we'll take a break here really quick in just a second. I'm sorry, we got started a little bit late, but I want to get through the preferences, and then we'll take a break. And what we are hoping to do is that we are hoping to use a smart object workflow so that when we are bringing material out of Lightroom into Photoshop, we are not baking that file. We are not creating it as a TIFF and bringing it in that way. So this whole naming convention down here on the bottom doesn't really matter. To be perfectly honest with you, this whole dialog setup right here doesn't really matter as long as we are working in a smart object workflow. Some people are going to embrace that. Some people are going to reject that. So if they embrace it, this external editing doesn't really matter as much. If they reject it, then it does matter that we've got this guy set up the way we've got this set up. If you want to look at it at the end, we'll see what your time looks like at the end of today. If you want to get a quick taste of what that's like, I'll be happy to show that guy to you. Okay, next thing over, file handling. If we click over here in file handling, we are leaving this as DNG, the file extension for this, the compatibility. All of this you can pretty much leave as the defaults that are in here. We are using the JPEG. We are going to leave this as medium. We are going to leave it as a fast load version of this. These have all been changes that have happened in Lightroom to compete with much faster programs like Capture One, but I'm just throwing that out there. You definitely want to leave this two things over here checked because the problem is that what people are doing is that they are using, a lot of this has to do with illegal characters and how they are treated. Now, Macintosh file system is very forgiving in this. So you can use a lot of what are considered to be illegal characters in a naming convention of a file. However, there's a lot of systems that reject this categorically. Unix systems are notorious for this. So the problem that you run into with this, if you're strictly working on your laptop with a hard drive, it's not that bad of a deal. But when you want to upload a file to a server, say you're working on your website and you want to upload one of your images to your Squarespace website, it will reject the file because it's got illegal characters in it. I've run into this problem like you cannot believe. Because again, in the work that I typically do, it's nothing for me to upload 5,000 files at one time to do something overnight. And if any one of them has an illegal character in it, it will be rejected and the whole upload gets rejected. So it's just how these things are treated. In the drop-down menu here, I don't know what the default is here, but what I'm going to show you is in this drop-down menu right here, you want to pick the big set that you actually want to be killed. We are saying that you want to replace illegal characters with underscores. You'll see you can do it with dashes or but anyway, underscores is what we pick to do this. And then when a file name has a space in it, again, spaces are fine in a Macintosh world, but they are illegal in a Unix world. They're actually illegal in an older system of Windows world. So if you have a space in a file name, it will reject the file. It will not see it as something that conforms to its naming convention. Again, current Windows, like Windows 10 now, Windows 8, has pretty much gotten away from that. But if you have somebody who's working in an XP world, there's real hardcore restrictions about that, and spaces are not allowed in names. So just something to actually be aware of. So that's what we've got going on set up here. For the interface, if we click on this guy, what we are leaving here, we are doing this pretty much at its defaults for the panels here. However, we did change the font size here to be large just because it gives you a little bit more screen legibility. This is actually going to be in your notes, so the PDF you've got, I'm going to talk about it in here really quick. The default for the screen color in here is black, and that's what we suggest leaving it as. However, if you click on this drop-down menu, you'll see you can change it. Chris does a little bit different version of it here, and it's just something for you guys to be aware of. You may want to sort of embrace this. He changes his to white. And the reason he changes it to white is that he finds that when kids are actually developing their files here in Lightroom and they are trying to essentially adjust a highlight point, that having a white reference gives them something to balance that against. So when they're looking at their image and they're trying to set the highlight point, how bright that should basically be, they have a white reference that's around it, and it is the surround, it is the interface of Lightroom. Does that sort of make sense? I think that that's a little more confusing personally, and that's also slightly troubling in that that white surround becomes then the color also of your eyes automatically adjust to the brightest thing in any given scene. And so your eyes are adjusting to the color of the interface, and that can cause you to feel like your file has color cast in it or a perversion in it. So it's just something to be aware of.
Or darker or lighter.
You could pick a light gray again. So this is pretty much up to you. We're leaving it as black. It's the default. If you feel really compelled to change it, you could actually, again, I don't think you would find a whole lot of people. Those aren't the things that are going to bite you later on. I just wanted to bring that part up. The note about that exists in the PDF so that you can actually go through and read that. In terms of the keywording entry, again, I think most of this is the defaults. We use commas to be the separators between keywords. Spaces, I think, is, again, a poor choice of something. The reason that that is that you can have keywords. If you leave it as spaces, let's say you, anyway, commas are just the easier thing in keywording to actually denote different keywords as far as that part goes. In terms of the film strip part down here, I don't know if you guys use badges if you work on any of this stuff. We don't. So we've left this at its defaults just so that you understand that. And then again, the tweaks, this is more just how the interface part works. All of this we've actually left at its defaults. And that is getting us through, I think. We can touch bases really quickly. If you look at performance really fast, this is not in the PDF, but I'll show it to you just so that you know. This has pretty much gone away now as a problem. However, if you've got a student who's working on a laptop that's, say, circa 2007, this can be a problem. So I don't know if you guys had any experience with this at all, but have you ever been working in Photoshop? This would, again, happen primarily, a whole lot more so, probably 2 or 3, 4 years ago, whatever, where you were working on a Photoshop file and all of a sudden you got either big white blocks or big black blocks on your image. So it would literally be an image that looked like this, and then all of a sudden you would have a gigantic black box that was right here, or a whole string of them. That was caused by incompatibility between graphics accelerations, the cards that were actually in those computers, and the graphic accelerators. So this software is designed to leverage your video card that's inside of here. If the video card is too old, this can cause those problems. If that's happening, this is how you undo it. You would uncheck this use graphic processor. The rest of this you can pretty much leave at its defaults. We bumped up the cache size for a faster read from the old version because most people are working on terabyte hard drives now or larger. If you had a hard drive that only had 120 gigabytes on it, you might want to trim this part down. And then the rest we can pretty much leave as it is. The Lightroom Sync part, we are not using this at all. This is where you can actually sync your photos to your Lightroom application on your phone. Again, this is so much more advanced than I think you guys want to get into. This is just not an area that I would want to actually get in and work on. And then network is actually in the same issue right here. You can use proxy servers with this. This is way, way, way more advanced than you want to get into. So why don't we do a quick break? Are you guys up for that? I mean, there's only 3 of us, or do you want to soldier on? Okay, well then we're going to go on. You can close this up now. This part's been set. We still have some settings that we need to deal with though. So again, back up to the Lightroom catalog, back up to the Lightroom menu down to catalog settings. This next guy will open up. Again, it's got a series of tabs that run across the top. So in the general setting right here, we're going to leave this in terms of where the information is located. It should be by default in the catalog. However, this backup we are going to change, and this is a critical one right here. Instead of doing this once a week when exiting Lightroom, you want to change this to never. The reason this exists is that this is not, when the word backup goes out, most people think that, well, I'm backing up all of my Lightroom catalog, my raw files, I'm backing up everything. It's a protection for me, right?
It takes like 5 seconds, so what is it actually doing?
What it's doing is it's only backing up the database. It's not backing up your raw files.
Right.
And we felt like that was misleading, because I think you look at this and you say,
In other words, the preference settings.
exactly. That's it. The only thing that gets backed up is that one little light. This is what gets backed up. It does this. If you look in again at this thing that we've made, it's this file right here. This guy is the only thing that is backed up. And it's backed up actually in a completely different spot on your computer. That's where it goes. So it doesn't even stay on your hard drive. So unless you know where this thing is, it's meaningless to you, or I mean, you have to be working on your own one. So at any rate, we discourage that because what we felt like, and I think this is something that you should encourage, is this entire Lightroom library folder should be being backed up because it contains everything. It contains that database file, but it also contains all of your raw files. So you have a true backup.
What do you think is the best way to back that up since it's dynamic and it's always changing?
We'll talk about that at the end of this as well. I'll show you a couple of things that just make a little note to make sure that we get to that part so I can make sure that I answer it for you. But at any rate, that's why we have changed this in the catalog setting because again, I think that this is a false sense of security here. We're going to go to file handling next. In the file handling, this is now changed a little bit. So this is one of the things that did get updated. The screenshots for this now are all for version 7, or not the latest version of Lightroom, but the one that we are suggesting everybody use. Is it 7.5? Yeah. I can see what one this is. Yeah, 7.5. Okay. So in this drop-down menu in the file handling here, this is now changed to, in your possible drop-downs right here, this is the size for your standard previews that are going to be rendered. We are leaving this at auto now. It's actually, you can override this and say that you want smaller ones or large ones. This auto, what it does is it actually looks at the computer that you're working on and it sets it to the resolution of your computer screen. So if you're working on a 30-inch monitor, your standard previews are going to be larger. If you're working on an 11-inch MacBook Air, they're going to be smaller. So auto we felt was fine. The preview quality, again, they're all JPEG, so this has to do with the compression. We thought that medium would be fine on this. And then the automatic discard, we've actually changed this. We've updated this to 30 days now, and the reason we did that was that, again, most students now have got hard drives that are large enough that they can carry this sort of overhead baggage without really a huge hit to them. It used to be that they were having these previews discarded after one day. That doesn't really give students time to actually, they import their work. If they don't do all the work that they're going to do on it on that day, then the standard preview gets discarded and it has to be rebuilt again for them to do the work. That seemed to us to be really onerous. That takes more time. You're not really saving anything. So the 30-day preview discard seemed to make sense to us. Again, that doesn't mean a student can't work on their file after 30 days. It just means that at day 31, when they go to open a file to develop it, it's going to generate the preview again for them. So that's all that part was about. The import number sequence here. So this is a really esoteric thing. You would think that there's no reason to actually have it set up like this, but there really is a reason to have this set up like this. So the analogy that I try to make with this is that let's say you get hired to copy a Gutenberg Bible. And so you set up your lights. This is my Gutenberg Bible right here, right? You set up your lights. This is the cover of the book. And I set up my lights. I've got my camera on my monopod. It's looking down at this guy. And I take a picture of the cover of the book, and everything's great. And then I open the book, And for page 2, I have to move either the book over or my camera over and change my lighting and shoot page 2. And then to shoot page 3, I've either got to move the book or go back up and move my camera over. That's a nightmare. So instead, you can change the import number sequence here. Instead of 1, you change it to 2. And what will happen is, every file you shoot, it will be every other one. So what you can do is you shoot page 1, then you shoot page 3, then you shoot page 5, and the import sequence will match. So you shoot all of the left side or right hand pages of the book first, and then you go back in and you shoot all the left hand. And you change your start number. Again, the first group, the odd group, will be starting with 1. And your second group will be starting with 2, and then your imports will all be in order. Does that make sense?
No. Yeah, but it sounds like you're talking about copying a book.
It's what this is designed for.
So that has nothing
So
to do with
that's only
anything
if you're doing the systematic kind of left-right.
What you're trying to do is you want every other file imported in every other file's order. You don't want to import the way it was shot. You want every other one.
But that's only applicable in very
It's
specific
very,
cases.
I'm just showing you what this is here.
Okay.
Because if they change this, all of a sudden they're going to be, their files will not be in the order that they shot them in.
Okay.
Okay,
So we leave it.
yes,
Long story short.
yes,
Okay.
yes, leave it, sorry.
Okay.
Metadata, the last thing that we're actually going to get to right here. And in metadata, what we've actually done, and this is a biggie right here, the defaults are to offer suggestions for recently entered values. That all part makes sense to us. That seemed to be smart. To include the developed settings in the metadata. So in any JPEG Photoshop file or TIFF or PNG that you create in Lightroom, all of the metadata is embedded in those files automatically. However, the one thing that's not here and the one thing that we are strongly suggesting is this, to check this automatically write changes into the XMP file. Now, what's going to happen is if we did not have this checked and we were to import, do an import, which we're going to do in just a second, when you went in and you looked at your camera raw files at the folder, we would go back into the Finder. We would open up this camera raw file right here. If we did not have that checked, all you would have in here would be your camera raw files. That would be it, period. However, by checking that, what ends up happening is there is an XMP file or a sidecar file that is written for every single one of those imports. And the reason that file, that XMP file, is important for us is twofold. Number one, well, let me ask you this, guy. This is my trick question, the only one I'll throw at you today, all day, I promise, I think. Can you name a program that will edit a raw file? Photoshop, people say Photoshop, people say Canon software, if you're shooting Canon, Nikon. The truth of the matter is you cannot edit a raw file. You can process one, but you can't actually go in and edit a raw file by design. So what happened was Adobe is actually, this is another one, Adobe money grab.
If you work on it, it actually saves it as a different file. The raw file stays the same.
What I'm saying is this. When Adobe first came out, Adobe, they were the pioneers of actually building the format for a digital file. And every single digital file that you have is actually an Adobe file. So all NEFs, if you're a Nikon shooter, those are actually TIFFs that Adobe has licensed to Nikon. What a TIFF allowed them to do, though, there's a little header in there that says that Nikon can put in its proprietary software that makes it a Nikon file so that nothing else can read it. Well, Lightroom can read it, Nikon can read it, but it's a proprietary Nikon file. It's the exact same format for Canon. Canon just put in their little special code that makes it a Canon. Exact same file for Sony, exact same file for Phase 1. Everybody's raw file is actually a TIFF file. When you buy a camera, part of the price that you pay on that camera is royalty that goes to Adobe. So every raw file that you shoot, every one, Adobe's paid for it.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
insane.
Yeah.
It's a part of the price of the camera. What they do, I think this is what they do. Don't quote me on this because nobody will talk about it. I think what they do is they look at the life of a camera and figure out how many exposures it could really make. and they pay Adobe based on that number.
Capitalism.
Oh, it's crazy. But at any rate, the reason that I bring this up is that, so that was the first thing that happened. So Adobe felt like they satisfied that part, that they could supply it to everybody, but then the law enforcement came along and said, well, this is all great and fine and well, whatever, but we will never use a digital camera because you can alter the file. I can put my head on your body. You're killing him. You're committing murder. I can put my face on it, whatever. All of a sudden, I'm the one committing the murder, right? So law enforcement said, absolutely not. We will not. Nope, we're not going to use digital. It is a non-starter. And Adobe came back to them and said, we will lock the raw file format down so tight that if anybody goes in and changes one thing in it, it will corrupt the file and ruin the file. You won't be able to open the file. So that is the consequence. This is what has led us to where we're at today. You cannot edit a raw file. There's no software that's made. There's no illegal software. If you can get inside of a raw file, but if you change anything in it, it corrupts the file to the point that it's unreadable. It self-destructs.
Oh, that's
You can work on a raw file.
yeah,
You
but
can.
that's all the setup.
You can.
Differently than that? Is that
So this is what happens. So when you work on a raw file, so you're in Lightroom and you do all sorts of developing. You make it, you change its saturation, you change the exposure, you do all of those things to it. You cannot save those changes back to the raw file. So instead what happens is they create what's called a sidecar file. It is an XMP file. It is a secondary file that sits right next to your raw file that says, this is how he developed it.
changes?
Exactly.
I
So the
explain
original
it,
file
yeah.
is still there.
It's there.
It is.
I explain it as like that everything you do, that's the recipe.
Exactly.
And that the raw file is the, raw ingredients, and so you can apply the recipe.
Yes.
But you're not, but then
It's
the
still
next
in
time
that
you
same-
open it, you've still got the raw ingredients and the recipe.
Exactly.
And they seem like they've combined to cook it,
Right.
but really, you
Two
can just,
separate things
you
in
can
one
just
file.
remove the recipe and the raw ingredients, like go right back to exactly what
Right.
you were.
So what happens in Lightroom is if you don't actually say that you want to generate this XMP sidecar file, Lightroom remembers all the development changes that you've done for every file. That's what's actually written into the database of Lightroom, along with all the history states and everything else.
But if you send it to somewhere else, it won't recognize those changes.
Exactly. So if you send your raw file by itself, you give it to me, all I have is the raw file. I don't have any of that information. If you give me the raw file and the sidecar file, the XMP, I get everything. And so the reason this becomes important to us too is twofold. Number one, if your database crashes or is corrupted, your XMP files will regenerate all of that database information. So when you go to import Lightroom, it will all the work that you've done gets brought in. But even better, if you somehow screw up and you upgrade your Lightroom catalog and you want to downgrade it, you can simply import, again, the raw files with the XMP next to it into an older version of Lightroom, and it will rebuild all of that XMP data for you. So you don't lose any of the work that you've done, which we felt was really critical. There's a downside to this. The downside to this is, again, you're now littering that camera file with, for every file that you bring in, there's now two files. There's the raw file and the sidecar file.
But aren't the sidecars really small?
They're incredibly small. They're like a literally 1K.
So it's not a big.
And no, it's not a big. It's just a lot more. It's if they're importing 50 files, they actually have 100 files. It's just more files. But unless they're really looking at it, that shouldn't be that much of an issue. But does that sort of make sense?
Totally.
Okay. So again, that was an important one for us that was not turned on by default. And then the rest of this, we don't get into the automatic face detection part. We don't get into any of that part. We can, sort of be done with all of that.
I'm waiting for the program that says it's a dumb picture and it won't take it. So,
Yeah.
or what they think it is.
Yeah, there you go, right? Something built in your camera. Okay, so...
Last side thing. You've probably seen the thing now where you got automatic shallow depth of field.
Oh, yeah.
Wipe out the background.
You know, but it's interesting how they're dealing with all of that because there's Photoshop. Adobe actually led the way with a lot of that, but they did it in a much better way. In the old days, with what Apple first came out with to emulate shallow depth of field, was it knew distance-wise where a figure was, and so it could separate the two, background from foreground, but then it just blurred the background, which is not really what happens in a camera. But now what the latest version of Apple's iPhone, what it actually does is it replicates the physics of a lens to create the bokeh that exists in the background the way a lens and light would really do it. It's a monster algorithm that does it.
Doesn't it have two? So it's got binocular vision, so it has depth perception, so that it can actually tell, right?
But it's not just. It's depth perception for everything. So it knows foreground objects, it knows midground objects, it knows background objects, because that's how it's pulling everything apart.
So are there some good apps that can actually use depth of field within?
All stuff that's on the iPhone. Nothing that's actually here now that can leverage that information. But that's coming. There's no question that's coming.
Okay.
Because that data, it's metadata, it will be written into the file, and there's no reason that Adobe can't have Lightroom and Photoshop understand that information.
You could post-production, change the depth of field.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's all heading to software, guys. The advances that are going to be made in Lightroom, in cameras and sensors, that kind of stuff. Do you really need a larger sensor for your camera? Do you really need to be able to shoot in any lower light than you can already shoot in?
If you're doing phase 1, what are you shooting with?
I shoot with a Hasselblad, a phase 1 back on a Hasselblad.
Right, so how big are
Oh, mine is, it's a 50 megabyte file. It's not really, it's not a biggie boy. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. They've now got a 150 megabyte file. That's a raw file. You process that out, that's a 450 gigabyte file.
So, but that would be useful for if you're making a monster print and you want
Yes,
to have
all the above.
I just have a full frame Sony, and that's
Again,
I haven't really made a lot of prints.
the inroads that are ultimately going to really be made over the hardware, the evolution of hardware is beginning to slowly wind down. The evolution of software is just getting started. But you're going to be able to shoot. ISO won't matter. That will happen in our lifetime.
I already wonder when I'm explaining all these concepts to the students, how much of ISO is that an actual thing with the digital camera, or
Not
is
really.
that really just like another algorithm? Like,
Well, the thing is, I always said,
what
no.
difference does that really
So
make?
what I say to them is that when you actually change your ISO, you don't pull the sensor out. You don't pull the 100 ISO sensor out and put the 400 ISO sensor in.
It's like putting another back
It's
on.
the same sensor.
Right.
So it's just turning up the volume. That's all you're doing.
Right.
Yeah, I think volume's good enough.
Yeah.
Crank that.
So at any rate, okay. I want to go back to the
Can
PDF.
we just take a quick?
Yeah. No, this is a perfect time to take a quick break.